The young lady that brought my the pies over, turned out to be my first wife who...
Roy Rogers was known as the King of the Cowboys. In short, he was one of the most prominent Western stars of his time, famous for his charm, smooth singing voice, and heroic roles in movies and TV. Beyond the curtain of fame, what happened to Roy Rogers, his wife, and their 9 children? And what remained of his fortune after his tragic death? Stay with us as we uncover the fascinating story of Roy Rogers, his rise to fame, his final days, and the legacy he left behind. Roy Rogers' net worth. Roy Rogers wasn't just another cowboy off the silver screen. He was the king. He was on the Motion Picture Herald Top 10 Money-Making Western Stars poll for 16 consecutive years from 1939 through 1954. In the years from 1943 to 1954, no other Western actor had come even close to the level of fame, as he stayed at the first position for that number of years. Even when the poll was closed, his legacy could not be touched. Not only was he admired in the West, but he was also adored. Rogers ranked among the victors of the box office poll from 1938 to 1955, where he held first place from 1943 to 1952. Only Randolph Scott overtook him in the final snip of the poll. However, what really separated him from the Western mold was that he scored in the top 10 money-making stars of all films in 1945 and 1946. Roy Rogers accomplished more than just acting as a cowboy in movies. He became a notable icon of American entertainment, so much so that his superstar status could be equated to the Wild Wests. By 1998, when Rogers passed on, his net worth was amassed to $80 million, which would be worth $150 million in 2025. In short, his posterity went beyond financial acquisition. By the mid-era of his career, he had starred in over 100 films and held dominance on radio and TV, while also running his popular show, The Roy Rogers Show, for the entire 1950s. But it wasn't just Roy who the audience loved. He was always seen alongside his wife, Dale Evans, his companion, George "Gabby" Hayes, and his famous horse, Trigger. His music and cowboy personality transformed him into an all-time Western star who earned universal love. But it wasn't always like this. Just one courageous act launched everything, and his life started with a legendary beginning. Roy Rogers managed to sneak into a Republic Pictures audition. He had no invitation whatsoever, but the outcome earned him a contract of $75 per week, which would be about $1,240 today. By 1960, Roy Rogers' rodeo grossed about $425,000 on a tour of state fairs, and he estimated it cost about $30,000 just to answer his fan mail. Although Roy Rogers admitted he was an introvert and show business was quite challenging to handle, even though he loved it. But show business gave quite enough funds. His investments ranged from real estate to a chain of restaurants bearing his name, and even a TV production company. But what happened to all that money after Roy's passing in 1998? The Roy Rogers Museum in Apple Valley, California, which housed many of his personal belongings, was eventually sold off. His iconic cowboy-themed merchandise was also auctioned. Many fans were left wondering, why did his family part with so much of what he worked so hard to create? Roy made a name for himself in the entertainment world throughout the 90s. Somehow, fate played matchmaking in a tour with the O-Bar-O Cowboys in June 1993, with just a phone call from the radio station in Roswell, New Mexico. The caller, a young woman named Grace Arlene Wilkins, had asked Roy to sing the Swiss Yodel and promised to bake him a pie in return. The situation at that time may have seemed light and trivial, but it was just the start of something as important as a love story. For the following 3 years, Grace and Roy were still in touch, and they exchanged letters as Roy's career progressed. By June 1936, they got wedded in Roswell, New Mexico, and yes, you're right, that's where their story began. It was as if their life together began in a dream. Soon enough, their family began to expand. They adopted their first daughter, Cheryl Darlene, in 1941, and their second daughter, Linda Lou, was born in 1943. 3 years later, his son was born in 1946, and they named him Roy Jr., but he was often known as Dusty. Unfortunately, a terrible misfortune hit shortly after the family's happy moments with Dusty. Grace had severe complications from childbirth, which ultimately led to her demise on November 3, 1946, leaving Roy a widower with responsibility for his 3 young children. The loss was indescribable because he had built his life with Grace, his family, and his future, until it disappeared suddenly. He may have been a hero on screen, but real life did not provide him with weapons to fight this sudden tragedy. Roy was left with the responsibility of caring for his children as he juggled work and being a single parent. But was he really alone? Just before Grace passed on in 1944, Roy had somehow met Dale Evans on the stage of a film production in which they were cast together. However, after Grace passed on, their friendship grew more assertive. Dale Evans offered Roy support, and soon enough, the connection between the two evolved into something special, until Roy finally decided to ask for her hand at the Chicago Stadium during a rodeo competition. The bride and groom exchanged their marriage vows on New Year's Eve in 1947 at the Flying L Ranch in Davis, Oklahoma, which served as their movie set for filming Home in Oklahoma earlier that year. Dale wasn't just marrying Roy, she was becoming part of a family that had experienced a tragic loss. But something was not right. The timing. It was just a year after his wife's demise, and people could not help but speculate that some business might have been going on behind the scenes. Or maybe it was, after all, fate. These 2 individuals had plans for their future together. After the birth of their child, the couple opened their hearts and adopted 4 other children. Their daughter, Elizabeth, was born with Down syndrome. Sadly, she did not live past her 2-year birthday. Nonetheless, her mother loved her dearly. Dale even published a book that challenged the cultural perceptions of people with disabilities. The other adopted kids were Mimi, Dodie, Debbie, and their last son, Sandy. Roy believed they could establish family connections, especially with children who most needed love. Although they appeared to be the most powerful and toughest rodeo riders, life threw some challenges at the family, and soon they sold the home they lived in. Did it mean it was left unattended and abandoned? Back in 1995, Roy and Dale spent $120,000 to purchase 138 acres of ranch property in Chatsworth. At the time, it was a significant financial decision. They bought the house that year and continued with its expansion. We moved from the Hollywood Hills to Encino in the San Fernando Valley, then to a ranch in Chatsworth. We always moved away from the encroaching population because Dad liked his privacy. He wanted his kids raised on a ranch, where they could have horses and pigs and chickens and cows. The expansive Double R Bar Ranch served as the studio space for The Roy Rogers Show, which aired on NBC from 1951 to 1957. They had renovated the house in such a way that you could immediately start filming after you left the bed, since his ranch offered the ideal, natural Western setting for movie production. But things were not as they used to be by the 1960s. Roy Rogers had decided to sell part of his famous Double R Bar Ranch. The news shocked fans who knew he had lived in Chatsworth for nearly 10 years. At first, 138 acres out of the land was put up for sale. But when it first sold in 1994, just 131 acres took the market. That sale brought him close to $1.3 million, along with a portion of future property revenue. Soon enough, 55 residential lots eventually replaced all the former horseback rider sounds and cowboy songs that had filled the area. But Roy and Dale maintained their house with a limited portion of land where their famous horse, Trigger, resided. Unfortunately, this was not to last forever. In 1965, Roy and Dale underwent a third heartbreaking experience after their adopted daughter Debbie lost her life in a church bus incident. The enormity of their heartache became too much for them to handle. This time around, they sold the rest of the land. The ranch had just too many memories, which brought sadness to them, and perhaps the only way they could cope with the grief was by moving out. They, in turn, decided to sell the rest of their assets before relocating to Apple Valley in California. Selling the ranch meant they would have been the owners. In 1969, Eugene Kilmer bought all assets in the property consisting of a 6,000-square-foot ranch house with a guest house, a tennis court, pool, and 3.5 acres of land. The name Kilmer is likely familiar to many of you since his son became the well-known actor Val Kilmer, who gained fame as the star of Top Gun and Batman Forever. The house remained with the Kilmer family. Even the Los Angeles Business Journal reported in 1992 that Eugene Kilmer and his wife Senga were still living in the house. As the years progressed, Roy and Dale's touch still seemed to be engraved on the walls. They say the ranch house was once painted pink, but it stood there frozen in time, with reminders of Hollywood's most famous cowboy. The backyard was still flowing with the rock waterfall from Roy's films. Their Western outfits still lay in their closets, untouched, and the fireplace in the rooms had spurs, horseshoes, and bridle bits set in the stone. On the terrazzo tile floor were also the fading initials of Roy, Dale, and 6 of their children. Roy and Dale revisited the house once more in 1997 to attend the dedication of the Chatsworth Rail Station. They ended the commitment with one last rendition of Happy Trails to You, their famous closing song. Little did they know that that moment would be their last visit to the house. The tragic demise of Roy Rogers. Throughout Roy Rogers' lifetime, his deepest affection remained with his family. They had adopted John David Sandy Rogers when he was still a boy from the orphanage, where Roy Rogers and Dale Evans first met him. Sandy joined the Army after his childhood, but his life ended tragically when he choked at a military hospital in Germany. The loss was devastating, and in Dale's sorrow, she penned a salute to Sandy to celebrate his time in military service. They also adopted a Native American orphan, Dodie, before the family adopted Marion after discovering her in Scotland. The family members embodied unlimited love for children because they treated all their children as their biological children. When Roy Rogers passed on, his household expansion surpassed his and Dale's expectations for their future. The survivors include his children, Roy Rogers Jr., Cheryl Barnett, Linda Lou Johnson, Dodie Sailors, Marion Swift, and Tom Fox. He was also survived by 15 grandchildren and 33 great-grandchildren. The Rogers family chose the Church of the Valley in Apple Valley to hold a memorial service for their father. Dusty Rogers ensured his father's legacy continued by managing the Roy Rogers Dale Evans Museum near the original ranch territory so fans could revisit Western film nostalgia until it closed in 2009. Throughout his life, Roy Rogers maintained his genuine cowboy personality. People who visited his museum found him working there most of the time, greeting guests firsthand while exchanging tales that left everyone feeling like dear companions. He continued to dress as the cowboy people remembered him as from his movie days, using his Stetson hat, silver belt, and pointed boots, even though they hurt his legs. The pain and suffering Roy Rogers endured did not alter his perception of life. He believed that if there were no valleys of sadness and death, we could never really appreciate the sunshine of happiness on the mountaintop. Roy Rogers passed on to the afterlife from congestive heart failure at his Apple Valley house on July 6, 1998, when he was 86 years old. At the time when he was alive, his sole wish was that he be buried at Sunset Hills Memorial Park, which later became Dale's final resting place 3 years later. Even after his demise, people still associate the figure of a cowboy with Roy Rogers when they think about them. But what was it about Roy Rogers that made it incredibly hard for people to forget? And what about his fortune? Where did all of that go? The untold story of his fortune and legacy. Born as Leonard Franklin Sly, Roy Rogers was more than a conventional cowboy actor. While he was alive and even after his demise, thousands of children admired him as their hero because of his films and TV shows. At the time, the majority of Western movie productions released after World War II used black and white cinematography, while Rogers produced his films in true color. And this was part of what made his films different from others. In short, Roy Rogers went beyond his role as a performer and established himself as a successful business executive. He signed an essential agreement with Republic Pictures in 1940, maintaining full authority over his image with Republic Pictures, despite other actors surrendering theirs to the studio. Because of this agreement, Rogers had exclusive rights to his music, voice, and books. This business move distinguished Rogers from other film stars and initiated his empire of merchandise. It even allowed Rogers action figures, cowboy adventure novels, play sets, and comic strips to enter the market because of this agreement. Roy Rogers Comics was a major success. In short, Rogers' merchandising business expanded to the point where it was credited as the second most well-known brand behind Walt Disney. During his television appearances, Rogers, alongside his wife Dale Evans, sang their well-known song Happy Trails, which Evans composed herself. The couple hosted The Roy Rogers and Dale Evans Show in 1962 on ABC Networks, as it presented Western comedy with variety programming. The television show premiered 3 months before ABC executives terminated its broadcast because the Jackie Gleason Show maintained higher ratings than their program. In addition to hosting popular shows, Rogers occasionally made numerous TV appearances. The actor appeared as Roy Rogers and with alternative cowboy personas in the Bushwhackers episode of Wonder Woman. Beyond being famous, Rogers also operated as a program producer. Through his self-owned Hollywood production company, he managed to create not just his show series, but various other television shows, such as the 1955 to 1956 CBS Western series Brave Eagle. In the series, Keith Larson portrayed a young, gentle Cheyenne chief. It also featured Kim Winona as his lover, Morning Star, and Anthony Numkina, who portrayed Keena, Brave Eagle's foster son. Throughout his professional career, Rogers has earned numerous recognitions and prestigious awards. Rogers received 3 Hollywood Walk of Fame stars on February 8, 1960, at Vine Street for Motion Pictures, 1620 at Vine Street for Television, and 1733 Vine Street for Radio. Rogers received the Golden Boot Award for Westerns in 1983 to recognize his central role in Western genre development. The Golden Boot Founders Award also commended his effect on the industry in 1966. Native American heritage and cultural ties also played a vital role in defining who Rogers was. In 1967, Rogers won the Outstanding Indian Citizen of the Year recognition from Western tribes after showing his Choctaw heritage from his mother's side. Rogers and Evans received their induction to the Western Performers Hall of Fame at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City in 1976. He also got double membership in the Country Music Hall of Fame by first becoming part of the Sons of the Pioneers in 1980. In 1995, he was inducted again as a founding member of the Sons of the Pioneers. But that's not where his line of awards stops. Rogers received recognition from the National Multicultural Western Heritage Museum in 2018 because of his rare and exceptional contributions to Western genre culture. History also records Rogers as the only individual to grace the Country Music Hall of Fame 2 times throughout his career. A Golden Palm Star was also dedicated on behalf of Roy Rogers and Dale Evans at the Palm Springs, California Walk of Stars in 2001. Rogers established a cultural impact that extended beyond the Western musical genre. His legacy influenced several musical pieces, specifically Roy Rogers from Elton John's Goodbye Yellow Brick Road album and Lyle Lovett's If I Had a Boat. Randy Travis also featured Rogers in his music video performance of Heroes and Friends. Throughout his lifetime, multiple movies and television shows mentioned his name throughout the productions, including 1988 Die Hard, where John McClane, played by Bruce Willis, adopted the alias Roy, while expressing his fondness for Roy Rogers. During the animated show American Dad, the main character Roger adopts the name Roy Rogers while trying to establish himself as Roy Rogers McFreely in the episode with the same title. Following his demise, his children continued his businesses, and they were able to continue his empire. His net worth, which was about $80 million before his death, would correspond to approximately $150 million in today's value. Most of his substantial wealth went to his 6 offspring, including Roy Rogers Jr., Cheryl Barnett, Marion Swift, Linda Johnson, Dodie Rogers, and Tom Fox. Back in 1994, Roy and Dale established future security for their children by giving each one 292.5 limited partnership units in real estate properties. A 50-acre Victorville property served as the main element of these assets by housing the museum dedicated to Roy Rogers Dale Evans' successful careers. Roy's decades of working as an entertainer produced other income sources that expanded beyond his property ownership. Royal entertainment properties like his motion pictures, television appearances, and products carrying his name delivered considerable financial success, and his estate continued receiving royalty earnings. These assets were shared between Dale Evans and her kids after his passing, as she lived on for some years to provide financial stability for their family. However, not everything was smooth. The IRS filed a complaint against undervalued real estate partnerships, which triggered a legal conflict that resulted in $700,000 in additional taxes and penalties. Nevertheless, Roy divided most of his wealth among his children to safeguard the Rogers family legacy alongside his own. Roy Rogers and Dale Evans are still considered good people. They tried to give back to society as much as possible by visiting hospitals and orphanages. It is still fascinating to see how much of an impact they had. Now, what about the King of Cowboys? Do you remember? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Before you go, explore the other videos on your screen.